Welcome to Chapter 15. We are discussing labor laws. Labor laws is a very important element of human resource management. There are actually individuals that are solely dedicated to working with labor relations and HR law within larger organizations. I encourage you to spend some time when you start looking into the human resources realm, if that's what you're looking to for a future career, to spend some time working with the different positions, from an HR generalist to an HR specialist, someone that actually specializes in certain fields, whether it's personnel management, which is the hiring, interview recruitment process. You might have a benefits compensation coordinator or a labor law specialist. These are different types of jobs that are available within the human resources industry. Something to keep in mind as you're working your way through your degree. This chapter begins with the inception of unions. Came about in the early 1900s. We have organizations that weren't respecting an employee's right to appropriate pay or working conditions. This is when unions came into effect. The concept of collective bargaining. This is the labor relation negotiations between union and management that sets some basic guidelines for an employee in the organization. There is, of course, this common understanding that the two need to work together, both unions and the organization, but one won't be making decisions about the other. So the employer has the right to manage their organization as they see fit, and they will adhere to the union's recommendations and guidelines. And on the flip side, the union has the right to manage their organization as they see fit, with suggestions from management from the organization, but they won't be actually mandating. The two will be working hand in hand. So it is a bit of a dance, really finding that perfect balancing act between the two, but knowing that everyone has the same common ground. Sometimes labor relation negotiations can become very intense when you have two people or two parties that are so vested in the best interest of the employee. We want to be able to maximize the productivity of our employees. We want to pay them appropriately. That's what the union wants as well. So why did unions come about? Because it was a necessity. We found that there were a lot of individuals that were working 16-hour days, receiving terrible pay and horrible working conditions. This is when people started to come together. This was a part of the New Deal, looking back in history, when we wanted to say that our employees will be well taken care of, that they will be well managed, they will have breaks, lunch breaks, they will be paid accordingly, really. So there is a lot of legislation, a lot of case studies that come up in this chapter. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935, otherwise known as the Wagner Act. A lot of labor relations, labor regulation really stems from this action that happened so many years ago. Mandatory subjects of bargaining, permissive subjects of bargaining, what should be agreed upon, what is standard for the industry, what sort of fluctuations we might have. Management security clause, midterm negotiations. Once someone actually sits down, a union representative and the organization, we're going to set some sort of contract and maybe a yearly re-up when we would sit down with that organization again. But we might have midterm negotiations when the union comes to the organization, or vice versa, and we say there's something we need to discuss even though it's not time for us to have our next union negotiations for this contract. It can be tricky if you're working in an organization that has multiple bargaining units. For example, the organization I work with right now has probably 10 to 12 different bargaining units because of the size of the industry and of the different types of positions that they have. From a human resources standpoint, this is very tricky. You're not only learning one 1,600-page manual, you're learning 12 of them. That's why this can be a full-time position for someone. There are a lot of regulations when it comes to who can participate in a union. There are actually closed union shops where you have to be a member of the union to even be an employee. That is legal as well. And there are union members' Bill of Rights. So once you are a union employee, there are dues that you need to pay, of course, unless you have, I believe it's some sort of religious clause where you don't agree with that, then you can opt out on a religious standpoint. But rights that a union member has, once you pay those dues, you have right to representation, right to attend a meeting. You become part of this bigger collective group. And again, keeping in mind the fact that labor unions came upon the scene over 100 years ago with the aims of protecting the employee, making sure that they're receiving the right wages, they're working in appropriate health conditions, minimizing safety violations. When we find ourselves in the middle of union negotiations, it's important to keep in mind that common denominator, that common factor of wanting to work in a very productive environment, getting the best for the employer and the best for the employee. Can be tricky, but it can also be a lot of fun. So I encourage you to look into it. You guys are doing a great job. We are almost there. Keep up the good work.